Welcome to the Enigma Files. Tonight, in this explainer, we're opening File 018 to investigate a mystery that has literally spanned a century.
A dark lake.
A mist-covered morning.
And beneath the surface,
Something moves. A long shape rises from the water. And then, just like that, it vanishes. So let's dive right into this, shall we? For nearly 100 years, people have been completely obsessed with one very specific lake in Scotland, desperately hunting for a creature that, well, might not even exist at all. We've got thousands of reported sightings, photographs that have sparked massive debates, and weird, unexplained movements caught beneath the waves. We're tackling a question that simply refuses to go away. Is there actually something hiding down there in the depths, or is one of the world's greatest modern mysteries just a massive product of our collective imagination? Let's unpack the facts.
The scene of the mystery, Loch Ness, Scotland. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to know exactly what kind of environment we're dealing with. Deep up in the Scottish Highlands sits Loch Ness. It's this massive freshwater lake right along the Great Glen fault line, and honestly, the sheer scale of this place is absolutely crucial to the whole story. We're not talking about some little pond here. This thing stretches for 23 miles and drops down to a staggering depth of almost 800 feet. To put that into perspective for you, Loch Ness holds more fresh water than all the lakes in England and Wales put together. Oh, and here's the kicker. The water is absolutely packed with peat that washes down from the surrounding hills. That means visibility down there is virtually zero. It's freezing cold, it's vast, and it's incredibly murky. Basically, it's the perfect hiding spot, making it the ultimate setting for a century-long enigma.
Now, the stories about these waters, they didn't just pop up overnight. Long before anyone even dreamed of sonar or digital cameras, the local folklore was completely steeped in this stuff. The most famous historical account actually goes all the way back to the year 565 AD. Yeah, that long ago. According to the old texts, an Irish monk named St. Columba was traveling through the area and reportedly came face to face with a water beast in the River Ness. As the story goes, this thing was attacking a local man, and St. Columba commanded it to stop and back off, which it totally did. It's fascinating to see how that early historical context set the stage, right? But the modern legend, the creature we all know today as Nessie, that really took on a life of its own in the 20th century.
The real turning point, the spark that set the whole world on fire with Nessie fever, was 1933. But why 1933? Well, it wasn't just a coincidence. That was the exact year the brand new A82 road was finally finished, running right along the northern shore of the loch. For the very first time, people driving by had this clear, elevated, totally unobstructed view of the water. And with all those new eyes glued to the lake, newspapers started getting flooded with an absolute explosion of weird sightings. The most famous one from that time came from a guy named George Spicer and his wife. They claimed they saw this massive, long-necked dragon or prehistoric animal literally cross the road right in front of their car before crashing down into the water. Almost overnight, these stories spread like wildfire. Everyone from London to Los Angeles was suddenly asking, is there actually an unknown animal living in Scotland?
And the hype reached a complete fever pitch the very next year. In 1934, a photograph hit the papers that showed what looked exactly like a creature with a long, graceful neck poking out of the rippling water. It was supposedly taken by this highly respected London physician, Robert Kenneth Wilson, and it became world famous as the surgeon's photograph. For decades, literally decades, this one single image was held up as the absolute holy grail of evidence that Nessie was real. But the truth behind the photo took a pretty massive detour. Years later, a deathbed confession completely blew the lid off the whole thing. It was an elaborate hoax. The monster was actually just a modified toy submarine from a Woolworths department store, totally rigged up with a fake head made out of wood putty. So the very picture that defined Nessie for an entire generation turned out to be one of the most famous deceptions in history. Crazy, right?
As we move into the late 20th century, you see this massive shift. We go from relying on old legends and blurry photos to full-on, rigorous scientific investigation. Researchers decided, it's time to systematically scan this place. A huge example of this was Operation Deep Scan back in 1987. This wasn't just a couple of guys in a rowboat with binoculars. This was a highly coordinated, massive effort. They had a fleet of 24 boats lined up shoulder to shoulder, completely spanning the width of the loch. They navigated down the lake all at once, using an acoustic sonar curtain to scan everything right down to the bottom. And over the years since, teams have thrown everything at this lake.
advanced submersibles, deep-water cameras, and even testing the water for environmental DNA.
So, what did all those high-tech, multi-million-dollar sweeps actually find? Well, but sonar did occasionally pick up some pretty strange anomalies bouncing back from the deep, big contacts moving in really weird patterns. But scientists were super quick to jump in and explain that these probably weren't monsters. A lot of times they were identified as thermoclines. Basically, those are sudden, dense layers where the water temperature changes so sharply that it actually bounces sonar waves back. Other pings turned out to be just underwater debris or really tight schools of fish. So the ultimate, undeniable takeaway from all this intense searching? Absolutely zero confirmed evidence of a giant, unknown creature has ever been brought up to the surface. They've searched this lake over and over with the absolute best tech we have, and the definitive proof is still completely MIA. Which naturally brings us to the 4 main theories that have popped up from all the source data to try and explain the Loch Ness Monster. Theory 1 is probably the most straightforward: an unknown animal. The idea here is that there's some undiscovered giant species of fish or amphibian or reptile just thriving down there in the dark. But doing the research for this explainer, you hit a major roadblock when you look at the actual biology. Researchers constantly bring up one fatal flaw with this idea: biomass. Because Loch Ness is so deep and the sides are so steep, it doesn't have those shallow, nutrient-rich areas that plants need to grow. Because of that, the food chain from the tiny plankton all the way up to the trout and salmon is just way too small. It's basic ecology. Loch Ness simply does not produce enough food to keep a whole breeding population of multi-ton predators alive.
Okay, theory 2 brings in a heavy dose of prehistoric excitement: a surviving plesiosaur. This is for sure the most popular image in the public's mind. The idea that Nessie is some kind of ancient marine reptile that somehow dodged the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And honestly, that debunked surgeon's photograph from 1934 heavily cemented that specific visual into our brains. But the scientific consensus gives a massive thumbs down to this one for a few key reasons. First off, plesiosaurs were most likely cold-blooded animals. They needed warm, tropical waters to survive, and Loch Ness is freezing cold all year long. But even more importantly, plesiosaurs breathed air. If there was a whole family of them swimming around in there, they'd have to constantly pop up to the surface to breathe. We wouldn't just be dealing with occasional blurry sightings, we'd be seeing them clearly every single day.
Theory 3 takes a total left turn away from biology and looks at psychology instead. Misidentifications. This is a hugely accepted explanation. It suggests that the vast majority of these sightings are just totally natural things, but our brains are tricking us through something called pareidolia. Our brains are literally hardwired by evolution to find familiar patterns, like faces or animals, in random visual data. So imagine you're staring out at this dark, incredibly murky lake on a super foggy Scottish morning. Your mind can easily connect dots that aren't there. A lot of the time, witnesses are just seeing boat wakes that bounce off the steep walls of the loch and keep traveling for miles after the boat itself is completely gone. Other usual suspects? Red deer going for a swim, resident seals that occasionally wander into the loch from the ocean, or literally just floating logs bobbing around on those weird underwater currents.
And finally, we arrive at Theory 4, hoaxes. As we saw with that toy submarine, we know for a fact that people have deliberately injected fake evidence into this mystery. But why? What drives people to do this? Well, beyond just wanting notoriety, there's a massive financial upside here. The Loch Ness Monster is an absolute economic powerhouse. This one legend drives a booming tourism industry that pumps tens of millions of pounds into the Scottish Highlands every single year. Hotels, boat tours, souvenir shops, they all heavily depend on the monster's enduring appeal. Skeptics point out that this is a pretty huge incentive to keep generating new sightings and keeping the myth alive in the headlines. But on the flip side, believers argue that sure, hoaxes absolutely happen, but mathematically, you can't just neatly write off every single sighting over an entire century as a giant scam.
So after detailing the elaborate hoaxes, all the high-tech scientific sweeps, and those hard biological constraints, we're left with this incredibly fascinating cultural phenomenon. Maybe the biggest mystery here isn't actually whether a biological monster exists, but why this specific story survives so fiercely, generation after generation. Millions of people still travel from all corners of the globe just to stand on those rocky shores and look out into that dark water. It feels like this legend satisfies some deep psychological need we all share. It represents something humanity is always chasing, that lingering, exciting possibility that something unknown is still out there, just waiting to be discovered.
Which brings us to the ultimate questions of today's investigation.
Is the Loch Ness Monster a genuine, undiscovered creature quietly hiding beneath the waves? Is it merely a massive, tangled web of mistaken identities, ancient legends, and wishful thinking? Or is it simply one of the greatest, most enduring mysteries ever deliberately created by human imagination?
The lake remains.
The waters remain dark.
And somewhere beneath the surface, the legend continues.
Subscribe to the Enigma Files,
Where every mystery has a file.
And every file hides a story.